welcome to our 177th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today's topic concerns the possibility of a United States boycott of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics and what that boycott could accomplish. Today's panel starts with Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist, then Joe Gaines, former faculty member of the University of Akron, Patty Haskins, member and candidate for re-election to the Wadsworth City Council. Ron, in the lead up to every Olympics, people in one country or another call for a boycott based on some specific behavior of the host country. History shows that boycotts never result in a change in the behavior in question. Why then destroy the dreams and aspirations of hundreds of athletes who have worked for years for a shot at an Olympic medal when evidence shows that there is little to no chance that a boycott will achieve anything?
John, I've been thinking about the sort of reasons behind why this might want to happen. In general, I'm opposed to boycotts and sanctions in the general sense, because they never hurt the people that they're supposed to hurt. As you say, if we sanction China, for example, or Iraq, for example, or Iran, for example, the people that get hurt are the athletes who would be performing in that, not the countries. Countries aren't going to worry about it. Probably the only one that I can think of, the only sanction I think of that was very effective is sanctions against South Africa. They're getting rid of apartheid. Nelson Mandela has stated that certainly had a beneficial effect in that case. I think there's an emotional thing behind this, John, as well as people want to do something about that. If we're concerned about the human rights things in China, I don't know why we aren't concerned about the genocide of the American Indian, but that's another question. So I can give you a couple of personal examples here. During the first Gulf War, my wife and I went down to Washington, D.C. We lived in Connecticut at the time and marched up and down Pennsylvania Avenue and heard some speeches, realizing in our hearts it's not going to do any good whatsoever in terms of influencing the government. But it felt emotionally like the thing to do. And at the end of it, it was satisfying. A second thing, again, against the apartheid thing, I learned that Shell Oil was a supplier of fuel to the South African military. So I stopped buying Shell Oil, gasoline. And that was a boycott that was called for. And again, it probably didn't do any good, but it made me feel good. And I think that's part of the behind this. But again, in general, I think you're right there, that it's done no good whatsoever in things like the Olympics or a lot of boycotts. Some do. I think some of the racial disparity issues here, some of these have some effect going on, good or ill, they have some effect. I think in terms of the specific case of the Olympic boycotts, I don't think they're worth doing. I really don't. It's an example of the country calling for the boycott, of expressing a concern. I think probably the committee is not justified in carrying this out. It's supposed to be a neutral situation. The Olympics are supposed to foster cooperation among the nations. And it could make a powerful statement, I'm sure. And perhaps folks that weren't previously aware of the problems that the boycott's supposed to address may take note of it and perhaps carry out some sort of action. But I don't think that the government in question is going to be influenced. And I really don't see the use of it, really, in this particular case.
Joe, what are your feelings on this topic?
Well, I understand the reason why somebody would want to boycott. And I'm not against boycotts in general, but I'm against this one because I believe that athletes, young people, should be considered for what they're doing, and they work hard for what they want and what they're doing and their achievements. And it's a whole different ball game. They don't want to make it political. We do, the governments do, and China wants to, but the athlete certainly doesn't have any political ideas here. They just want to continue working hard and achievement of their passion, and I agree with them on that. Um, I I looked in this topic a lot and read a lot. There's a lot on it, a lot of information. The uh, the Chinese, in many cases, seem to be doing something that. Unknown caller. You hear that?
We all hear that, Joe. That's not your roofer, that's for sure.
It's one of those days. I'm going to boycott the world. But anyhow, the Chinese are using this in many cases to build up their reputation as a world leader and the power, and they want to do that, and they have in the past, and they will in the future. Now, what they've done is terrible. They've raped. Their governments have taken over other governments. They've ruined governments. But at the same point, would a boycott make any changes? No, it wouldn't make any changes at all. There wouldn't be any change from our point of view or their point of view. The Chinese are going to do what they doggone well please. But I'm hoping that we can come to some sort of understanding. And the thing is, we are backed by other countries for not for a boycott, but to do something.
About the inhumane treatment of people in China, you mean?
Yeah.
Patty, where are your thoughts?
Similar to what my other panelists have said, I am not a big fan of boycotts. I think, as Ron said, if there's a product or that you don't particularly like, or like the views of the owner of that product, then you may choose not to purchase that particular item. But to have national boycotts, I'm not particularly in favor of. The Olympics, though, over the years, for many years, has seemed to be kind of a political football to be used to express political opinions and opposition to things. As you had stated to us earlier, there are very few times that the Olympics hasn't been boycotted by one country or another. I think if there were probably any Olympics to have boycotted, it might have been the 36 Olympics in Berlin, where Hitler was going to show the strength of the Aryan race. Avery Brundage, who was president of the U.S. Olympic Committee, then this was prior to being in charge of the whole thing, of course, he was a known anti-Semite, but he came back and said, oh no, the Jewish people are not going to be discriminated against. However, Germany only allowed, I think, 2 Jewish athletes to compete. But that might have been the one we might have wanted to skip. However, it did allow the United States to go and show that Jewish athletes were, in many cases, the same or on a par with the Aryan athlete. And of course, that was the rise of Jesse Owens, and where he received all of his medals, which kind of ended up, as being a quash against Hitler's claims. In more recent years, there still continue to be boycotts. In '76, the Montreal Olympics was boycotted by almost every African nation, and it was kind of a weird thing. They were opposed to the fact that New Zealand was allowed to compete in that Olympics and the reason they didn't think New Zealand should is because New Zealand allowed their rugby team to compete in South Africa. And then the other nations in Africa decided that New Zealand should be banned from the Olympics because they allowed their team to compete with apartheid in South Africa. New Zealand was allowed to be in, and consequently almost all of the South African nations then pulled out of the Olympics. In 1980 was probably the one that most people remember, and that of course was the Moscow Olympics. And the United States, along with I think it was like 60 65 other countries had agreed to boycott the Olympics. And the reason was because of the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan. To show how effective that was in 1980. The Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989. So that really wasn't an effective source of our anger to show the Russians and to get them to change what they were doing. They didn't pull out of Afghanistan because we boycotted the Olympics. The only thing that prompted was that in the next year, in 1984, the Olympics were held in Los Angeles, and the Soviets and I think something like 18, 19 other countries boycotted the Los Angeles Olympics, which meant for a much smaller presentation. Now, yes, all the events were well attended by United States citizens. It was a success, but there's always been the question, well, okay, you won the Olympic medal, but you really weren't competing against all of the best. As Ron had said, when you do these boycotts, the only people that are really injured by it are the athletes who have trained for 4 years for those events. I mean, now, maybe not to all of them, but for many of them, the Olympic medal is the epitome of success in the athletic world. And they only have that chance once every 4 years. It's not like a World Cup where, for the skiers, for example, where they can go back next year and win it. This is once every 4 years. The other thing is, as Ron said, Olympics are supposed to be apolitical, which is why at the end, all of the countries mingle together. And, it's supposed to be this above all of these country rivalries. I always find that interesting, though, because even though that's what's said, they always give a medal count for which country is in the lead. And, does the U.S. have the most medals, and how many gold medals do they have? So that, there is a little bit of nationalism involved there. But if it were my choice, I would say let the athletes go to the Olympics and do not boycott it this time.
One of my concerns is the fact that all countries, all countries involved in the Olympics signed an agreement, signed the fundamental principles of Olympism that eliminated political or included political neutrality. My question is, a politician, no matter what country they're in, are going to violate anything as long as it provides an advantage to them of some sort.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can trust any politicians to keep their word on anything if something looks like it'll give them a better deal.
Maybe one of the things is to change the location.
Hey, all except for you, Patty. I don't mean you.
It might be good to change the locations. I mean, we keep seeing the Olympics being held in countries that are contentious and there may be problems with, and why the selection committee can't see that in the selection. I mean, we just had the Olympics in China. How long ago? I don't recall. It wasn't too many summer Olympics ago. And now we're back.
Well, it's coming up this summer.
Well,
this summer is in Japan. Tokyo is the summer
that's right.
Olympics
Tokyo.
in Japan.
Right, I'm sorry.
But a couple of Olympics ago, it was in China and had the same problems. The Winter Olympics were held in Sochi, Russia, last time or time before. And there was a great deal of controversy about that because the Soviets, were very, very anti-gays. And, they were stating that they had a very strict policy on that. And very frankly, many of the United States athletes were gay. And they were concerned about traveling to Sochi because of that discrimination. We still went. but perhaps the selection committee needs to start looking at some of these countries that tend to make the Olympics political and to steer away from them.
Part of the problem is they have to start many years in advance to
Yeah, it's like
make the
6 years
decision.
ahead of time. Yeah.
Well, there is the view that maybe what they need to do is have it in one place all the time, and that place would be, of course, Greece,
Athens.
like
Yeah.
Athens. And I wouldn't disagree with that. I'd like to see that.
The only problem is that what they're finding of late is the countries are losing money on the Olympics.
Right.
And I'm not sure Greece in their present state could afford to handle any Olympics.
For
So
4 years.
Well, what do you think the United States is going to do next year? Are we going to boycott or not?
No,
I don't think they will.
I don't think we will.
Well, the Biden administration is considering it.
Well, he has to. I mean, it's out there. He's got to think about it. And so he has at least the reason to say no.
A lot will depend, unfortunately, it is political. A lot will depend upon the pressure that is placed upon the administration to have the Olympics. Trust me, there will be a great number of people, meaning the athletes and their supporters, that are going to push to go to the Olympics, as well as the television networks. And I'm not sure which network has coverage of the Olympics this time, but that's a big moneymaker for them. So
John,
they're
what do
going
you,
to lobby for it.
John, do you think if Trump was president, we would be going to the Olympics? It would be
Yes.
different?
No, I think we would be going. I don't know. Trump is so unpredictable.
Yeah.
Well,
But
the situation doesn't change. When we just recently had a problem with Russia where we pulled some ambassadors and they pulled some, and it goes on all the time. I don't know how you can really predict it. So best not to do it.
I was always surprised that Jimmy Carter just seemed to come out of the blue with his boycott of the 1980.
1980. And he really suffered for that, because that was brought up as one of the in the election, and it was thought that hurt him in the election. I mean, there were other things. I mean, we had the Iran hostages. We had, of course, people didn't know what he had done for them, but that wasn't released until later. Watch the movie Argo. But it really did hurt him, because there were people that turned away their loyalty from him because of pulling out of the Olympics.
The Tokyo Olympics. Is
Yes.
there any reason to be considering a boycott of Tokyo?
Well, is China going? In the past, there have been boycotts of the Olympics, like I mentioned about the African countries boycotting in '76 due to the inclusion of New Zealand, who just had basically accepted South Africa. My guess is there might be some concern that Japan hasn't excluded China from the Olympics. I mean, we're going to be competing against the Chinese. Now, the Winter Olympics is not their strong suit. This is a Summer Olympics, though, and the Chinese have been moving up in the medal rounds. Can you tell that I'm a real big fan of the Olympics? I love watching them every time they're on.
I do too.
And the Chinese are, they excel in diving. I mean, they win all the diving medals now, gymnastics, a number of different events, and then, things like badminton and other events.
Sporting events that I watch.
Is badminton an Olympic sport?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it really?
Particularly countries like Pakistan and India are extremely strong in badminton.
I'm glad to hear that. I always
They're
liked
good at
playing
jumping the net.
because I was no good at tennis.
Yeah, it's been in for quite a lengthy period of time.
Didn't know that. One of the
Yeah.
things that's talked about an awful lot these days is something called virtue signaling. And I suspect that it is rampant in most of the demonstrations that we see on television. People carrying one sign or another. Are they advertising themselves, or are they really trying to achieve some kind of social change? And I'm wondering if virtue signaling isn't at play when we're talking about boycotting, boycotting anything, but boycotting the Olympics. Are we trying to show how, as a nation, we are so much in favor of justice and human rights and so forth?
That's
Is it-
tied into the emotional aspect of it. I think it makes it by signaling that you are virtuous in this sport, you're making yourself feel good, and that's
Yeah.
true for individuals. I think it's true for groups.
But are you, people, are they just advertising their own virtue or the way they'd like to be seen?
Probably some of that. I don't know that that's true.
Ron,
Relevant.
It's
Yeah,
probably a little of both. I mean, I think I really think that most people that do that are doing that because those are their beliefs and they want to make things better. And if it makes them look good in the meantime, that's fine. As far as a country, virtue signaling, we're trying to show others that we're above the rest. And so I think that's more, again, though, we come back to these boycotts, and do we really think that China is going to treat the Uyghurs better because we don't go to their Olympics? I don't think that there's a chance that could
No.
happen. And
Totally
so
agree
when
with you.
it does not, I mean, there's other ways to address that situation, which might have more of effect on the activities and actions of the Chinese.
Well,
than
the only thing is though that because of the boycott, or talking of the boycott, we now know that there are problems. I'm more aware of the problems going on with China and in the Tibet and other countries around it and its own area than I did before because of the talk of the boycott.
Well, people around the world have been able to watch television and see what's happening in the United States for the last year. And to Ron's point, we do have a history of ill treatment of the Native Americans. And also, don't forget, slavery was a United States institution. And I guess my question is, would we be talking about a boycott to try to distract people from our own history?
It's Olympics particularly such a powerful public relations thing. You can't discount that. We're trying to make a point. And you're right, it certainly might distract. There's always that, well, hey, we can do this because you did that.
Yeah.
Why should we worry about that? Look at the slavery you had. Why are we so bad?
There's something that's been burned in my memory ever since I was post-teenager, I guess. The lunch counter sit-ins in the South, and the way we treated these magnificent young people who were following Martin Luther King's peaceful resistance philosophy, and sitting there taking incredible abuse from all sorts of people, not only the name calling, but pouring ketchup on their heads. And, we've got that to live down. And we haven't lived it down yet. In fact, we've forgotten all about peaceful coexistence in this country. We've gone backwards. Martin Luther King is no longer relevant. His philosophy of judge people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, we're forgetting all about that. So we've got an awful lot that we have to live down, and it's hard for us to stand on a pedestal and boycott the Chinese Olympics because we're so much in favor of human rights. And that's my little soliloquy. And I see that we're just about out of time right now. But thank you very much, folks. And see you in 2 weeks. And hopefully Bryan will be with us then.
Very
Thank
good.
you, John.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.